Hi, this is Shermeen Yousif. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Architecture, Florida Atlantic University. Last week, July 23rd, I presented a lecture, a webinar, as part of our virtual research in action series at the university level, and it was an interesting, I hope that you enjoyed it. It was a lecture on the role of artificial intelligence in augmented architectural design. Now, in this session, I'm recording my answers to some of the questions that I couldn't answer due to the time constraint. So I'm gonna go by each question and try to give an answer as much as I can. So one of the questions I received is, do you see a future where AI could be used in a single family home building versus large buildings? Very interesting question. And my answer is yes, I do. I do think that AI will be used at different project scales and different levels of the building design process or phases. Now, practically speaking, design and construction firms, they're often concerned with large buildings and larger scale, more commercial buildings. Yet I think AI is going to be significantly impacting design in general and impacting smaller building scales also. I believe it's a paradigm shift. So after artificial intelligence, design process and engineering and production, all disciplines, I think, are impacted equally, maybe not necessarily equally yet now, but in general, I believe that all disciplines and fields and in terms of design, building design and construction, they will be impacted significantly by AI sooner or later. So it might be the case that larger scale buildings and more commercial buildings that AI applications can be used for more kind of earlier than smaller scale buildings. That's just me predicting. Now, another question is, would the use of AI impact the price of real estate? Very interesting. Now, I think that AI will impact each field maybe in a different way because when it comes to design a process, using AI can actually mean that the corporates and the firms, architectural design firms and construction firms would want to construct developments and build new projects using AI. And AI can be, I believe, it can be commercialized, and it would be commercialized. I think it has been already like that recently. Maybe this is similar to the sustainability wave that we have noticed since the 90s, and sustainability has been really commercialized the way I see it. So it's hard for me to predict how AI will impact the real estate market and developments, but I believe that AI will impact the real estate. Now, as an architect and a researcher, I'm not in that field of real estate developments. So I'm speculating that it can be impacting also very soon. And it can be the reason that real estate design process that uses AI can lead to more expensive developments. Again, this is just speculation, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but I hope that I tried to answer the question. Another question is about human reaction. How do we train an AI to drive a car or feed a baby if you cannot teach it compassion? Now, this is also a great question. I believe that the whole topic that this question is coming from is the topic of AI and issues of bias, ethics, etc. So unfortunately, we encode and create algorithms with certain bias, and we need to be very careful since we are somehow creating a conscious machine, an intelligent machine, and we believe that I believe it's a huge responsibility, and we need to be very careful considering how those machines would function, taking into consideration that there is some ethical imperatives that we need to be kind of careful about, and how do we address our bias? How do we address our kind of issues that we face in the human society, and how these issues can be addressed in the machine kind of intelligence society, which is I think very interesting, yet it's also kind of problematic thinking about it. Now, another question is asking about who else knows what you're doing. NREL, AIA, ASHRAE, etc. Great question, and thank you so much. The question started with fantastic work and some compliments, so I really appreciate those compliments. Now, I have been a member of ASHRAE, AIA, and I'm aware of this kind of research going on in some organizations. Now I know that industries are actually adopting AI, maybe earlier than in academia. And I know that in architecture design, AI is research is still in its infancy. So it's kind of like 5 years ago when we started employing and applying AI into architecture design. But I know that in engineering and other disciplines, it has been more developed as a research area using AI. Now, when it comes to these organizations, I believe they're using AI, or participants and researchers and associates to those organizations are using AI. And we need to be kind of maybe more collaborating with those organizations and industry and professional practice. So unfortunately, there is always this gap between academia and research in academia and research in professional practice and industry. And it can be more practical when it comes to professional practice and industry, that the research is actually addressing certain problems, and the goal is to solve those problems, while in academia we tend to actually speculate and address issues, but we experiment. Sometimes we experiment for the sake of exploration, which I think is important for academic research. But in terms of AI applied to industry versus in academia, there's a gap, I think, and I think in some cases it is actually maybe more elaborate, more advanced in some kind of industrial related research. But speaking of AI and design process, I'm not aware of kind of many research activities happening right now, and I see more people, more architects, more professionals really excited about AI, but I believe that it is it's still not as, like, we're not using AI to its fullest potential. That's how I see it. So I'm not sure how ASHRAE and other organizations are actually using AI right now, But I've been to ASHRAE conferences, for example, and AIA, where there are some research papers on AI using linear regression and other methodologies. So they are using AIA, and I'm sure NREL and other organizations mentioned in the question are doing that. So I just believe we need to maybe coordinate and collaborate more with those organizations so that we are actually kind of feeding each other in terms of this collaboration between academia and industry. So great question. I hope that I answered. Another question says, this was a great presentation of AI. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much. This is more of a comment. I agree that AI is a very interesting research area, and I tried my best to make the presentation less technical, more interesting. So I hope that you enjoyed it. One more question is asking, I found that the hardest party to convince to do ZEB is the owner, then the architect, then the builder. Are you having any success convincing these groups that they need to be on board? So this question is related to the issues that I spoke about in the presentation, which have to do with the environmental issues we'll be facing, and also the urban growth, population growth, and net zero energy, and how we need net zero energy to be every building should be net zero as soon as we can, hopefully by 2030. But the question is more about how the owner, the architect, and the construction or the builder, construction firm, and so on, how are they kind of having different goals and objectives. And I agree with that. The clients are hesitant usually to add more initial cost when it comes to achieving net zero. While from my perspective, the architects are always interested, but they may not all have the skills and the knowledge to do simulation and optimization. So from my experience researching in building environmental performance simulation and optimization, it took me a while. So during my PhD, my research, I had to take courses to gain knowledge and experience. And I had to experiment with those technical kind of skills needed to perform simulation. And I had to learn by myself and so on. So we have lay architects who are not necessarily experienced with those simulation / optimization kind of technical aspects. They not necessarily want to join that kind of goal of net zero, but more architects are actually learning. So I'm positive and optimistic that we have more architects, and now we are teaching that. So I'm teaching an environmental technology course at FAU where students are actually learning and becoming equipped with those simulation and environmental performance evaluation kind of methods. So I believe this problem is actually being solved year by year. Now, in terms of the other parties, when it comes to building design and construction, I believe clients can be convinced that initial costs can be higher, but then operation costs are lower. And usually the way to convince the clients is actually using simulation outputs and scenarios. What if, for example, what if we add a more kind of high performing window type, and this will save us cooling loads, for example, this amount, which means we are saving on utility bills, this amount per year, and so on. So this way, with simulation outputs and scenarios and those what if scenarios and cases, we can actually convince the clients and get this kind of objective of net zero achieved, hopefully. So the problem is is still there, but I believe we are getting somewhere. We're progressing, maybe slower than we should be, but I believe we're progressing in terms of the design knowledge, the expertise, the awareness of the importance of designing and building carbon neutral buildings and net zero buildings. So the potential of AI in this kind of area is really high. So I believe AI can bring this design team and building design professionals together on the same board. Similar to, maybe different, honestly, different from BIM, building information modeling, where the same model is shared between the architects and other professionals, the mechanical engineer, the energy modeler, and so on. I believe AI can also bring the team, the design team together, but probably in a different way, in a more data-driven, in a more maybe friendlier user interface. And what's interesting about AI is that it's an intelligent kind of algorithm or networks that can actually handle complexity. And I believe the building design process is a very complex activity and task, and data-driven design and using AI is actually the kind of the future and the solution to this. And bringing those parties together will be really kind of facilitated using AI. This is how I see it. One more question. Great presentation, Dr. Yousif. Thank you for sharing your knowledge on such an interesting and relevant topic. Can you expand a bit on the notion that what is simple for humans is not simple for AI and vice versa? What is simple for humans that is hard for AI? Very interesting. So thank you so much for the kind words. Now, I'm happy to expand on that. I have used in the presentation a quotation from Ian Goodfellow, the author of the book Deep Learning, with other authors. There is deeplearning.book.org link if you can, if you want to go there and find it, if you Google it. And I'm really convinced of what Ian Goodfellow says about, in his introduction in the book, he says, today, artificial intelligence is a thriving field with many practical application and active research topics. We look to intelligent software to automate routine labor, understand speech or images, make diagnoses in medicine, and support basic scientific research. In the early days of artificial intelligence, the field rapidly tackled and solved problems that are intellectually difficult for human beings, but relatively straightforward for computers. Problem that can be described by a list of formal mathematical rules. The true challenge to artificial intelligence proved to be solving the tasks that are easy for people to perform, but hard for people to describe formally. Problems that we solve intuitively, that feel automatic, like recognizing spoken words or faces in images. So I agree with this part that the computer, for example, computer vision has now been a really developed kind of area of research. And it's difficult to kind of make the computer see the way we see. And that's for us as just kind of, we have this vision automatically. So I believe this is what Ian Goodfellow is actually emphasizing. So we still have to go through further development in terms of those tasks, like computer vision, for example. But we are progressing, and this is how AI is moving forward, I think, is that automating and creating machines that are capable of our intuitive tasks that are easy for us, right? So, for example, the area of AI imagination and creativity, which I'm really interested in, becomes important because obviously AI networks that can solve classification problems and supervised problems are straightforward. Like you can see the prediction is mostly accurate, for example. But when it comes to AI creativity and unsupervised and generative deep models, it becomes more kind of complex. How do we actually evaluate the results from those AI networks? And creativity is and imagination is something we can actually debate on when it comes to humans. So how about machines? So it's a very interesting topic, and I believe it is the kind of the future of AI. This kind of the tasks and the activities that can be easier for us, yet and intuitive for us, yet are really hard when it comes to kind of how to make the machines conscious and capable of those kind of tasks. So great question, and longer discussion maybe can be kind of more better for answering the question. So I have to be brief in this case. So thank you so much. Another question says, your work with neighborhoods and cities is very impressive. Do your models also incorporate transportation and utility needs, including waste disposal or recycling? Yes, so thank you. And I presented this use of AI for urban cities, for focusing on certain layers. And this is one of the kind of models existing right now. There's a startup called Space Maker. Now, in our workshop that we offered, the three professors, Professor Bolojan, Professor Vermiso, and myself, as part of this Digital Futures.world conference. And our AI workshop emphasized the use of AI for urban scale projects. So as part of the agenda. So we actually, I believe that AI can be and should be kind of employed for urban scale projects and urban cities and planning and design. So there is this urban planning and urban design, which are two different fields. But I believe AI is applicable to any kind of scale, and when it comes to how do we apply it for certain objectives. So transportation and utility, as the question actually is stating. I believe the question is with AI is how do we actually encode information, and how do we use AI, which means that what kind of algorithm, what kind of networks we're using. So encoding and making clear our objective and our parameters become a task, and also what AI we're using for this certain task becomes also very important. So for example, in our workshop, we targeted solar radiation analysis at the urban scale level. So we use pix-to-pix GAN, which is a supervised method, and it uses this paired data, and it offers highly accurate prediction when it is really trained well, the network itself. So when you have thousands and thousands of data sets or images, the network will be trained well, and then it will give you or offer you an accurate prediction. So we experimented, and we have some kind of knowledge on what AI is actually gonna achieve, what we needed to achieve for what task. So this becomes, I think, important because AI networks are methods so they're there, but I believe the challenge and the question is how do we apply them? So I'm sure that we can apply AI for cities and for any kind of the mentioned tasks. So incorporate transportation and incorporate other aspects. But the question is how exactly we use the AI and what AI and what do we expect AI to perform? What kind of task it performs and how we curate the data sets and understand the AI architecture, and all of these become really important to give us the desired results. So I hope that I answered the question clearly. And again, I did my best to understand the questions and answer them. So I hope that the answers are really kind of informing. And thank you so much for listening. And I really appreciate this wonderful interaction, and the questions are really great. Thank you for listening to me. And I hope that I can meet all of you again in future webinars. Thank you. Bye.